Hello and welcome to the How to Thrive podcast. This podcast is hosted by me, Claire Sanders, and my sister and co-founder, Helen McMahon. Together, we are on a mission to empower individuals and teams with the human skills they need to thrive, maximising performance, minimising risk, and optimising well-being. If you'd like to find out more about how we can help your practice, please get in touch via our website, www.being-human.co.uk. I'm delighted to introduce Silkin as one of our sponsors for today's podcast. Silkin is a full-service law firm that works closely with organisations to help protect and enhance what matters most. Whether it's navigating an increasingly complex political and economic landscape or aligning legal strategy with broader business goals, their approach is thoughtful, commercial and deeply human. I've worked with Silkin on a number of projects and have always found them to bring a brilliant combination of wisdom and warmth, serious expertise delivered in a way that's engaging, practical and genuinely enjoyable to work alongside. Thank you to Silkin for supporting the podcast and for the role you play in supporting in-house lawyers to thrive. Find out more about their work at www.lewissilkin.com. I am delighted to introduce you to Lawyers on Demand, one of our sponsors for today's podcast. Many of our listeners will be all too familiar with the increasing pressure to deliver more value, operate efficiently, and bring meaningful insight into their organisations, often all at once. That's exactly where Lawyers on Demand comes in. Working with in-house legal teams around the world, Lawyers on Demand provides access to world-class flexible legal talent and innovative legal operations solutions. They support teams to build legal functions that are not only efficient, but truly strategic, responsive, and ready for whatever comes next. And just as importantly, they're also creating opportunities for legal professionals to work in more flexible and fulfilling ways, something we know matters deeply to so many in our community. Thank you to Lawyers on Demand for supporting the podcast and for helping reshape the future of in-house legal teams. You can find out more about their amazing work at www.lawyersondemand.com.
It's so important to have a really big, hairy, audacious goal. But ultimately, when you achieve that goal, when you get to the top, it is just one more moment.
Morning. How are you doing? Morning. I'm all right, thank you very much. The sun is shining. It's all good.
So today is Sunday. We are both working on a Sunday, but that is largely, for me certainly, because on Thursday we are in Manchester.
Yes.
For How to Thrive, our first trip of outside London for How to Thrive. We tried it 2 years ago and we weren't ready. I don't think Manchester was ready. Or maybe it was just us. Anyway, it didn't happen, but this year it definitely is. So on Thursday we are running our full day How to Thrive in Manchester. Can't wait. It's going to be really interesting. Totally different group of people. There's a few familiar faces who live in that neck of the woods who are coming, who have been to London, but other than that, totally new. So I hope we translate. I hope when we move outside our London bubble, everyone kind of understands our slightly different style of legal conference. So I'm very excited about that. So today will mostly be printing name badges and making sure I've got enough pipe cleaners and all of those founder things that people don't realise goes into putting on an event. So there we go. Helen, you've just been to VMG, which is a veterinary conference, and we've been talking about all the really interesting pieces of wisdom that you gleaned along the way. So we've got a bursting list of people we're now going to invite onto the podcast on the back of it. So that's always useful. Any particular highlights?
Oh gosh, I just love the connect with all of these things. I love the connection. I love the opportunity to have different and varied conversation and hold space with people to explore stuff that maybe haven't. I think probably the last session I attended, which was the emotional boundary keeping, would definitely going to come, hopefully get Bronwyn involved to come and talk about that to us, because I think that's such an important piece in life and in leadership, and I think that just really inspired my thinking on how we could do things.
Awesome. So lots to mull over, lots to think about, lots to do. So if you're listening to this, which hopefully you will be, when it's first released, fresh off the press or Thursday, as you're listening, we will be in Manchester talking about change, but we are bringing exactly the same or very close to the same, because we always have a little debrief and work out what went well and what didn't. So it may adapt slightly depending on how Thursday goes, but we'll be bringing pretty much the same content to London in October. So if you listen to this going, oh, I wish I was in Manchester, then we'll sign up to London.
Yeah, simple.
But I'm sure we will talk lots about it afterwards. We'll be buzzing, I am sure. So yeah, enjoy the podcast. This week we've got Bonnie, who is I was going to say professional mountaineer, but I feel like I'm not sure she is. Is she a professional mountaineer? She is a mountaineer who has climbed Everest and much, much more. And we pulled together the lessons that we think are applicable to teams from her amazing story at the end. Should we hand over to Bonnie?
Yeah, enjoy.
Today's guest, I'm very excited, is Bonita Norris, who is a speaker and a mountaineer. And I'm really excited to drill into this because one of my favourite places in the world is the Lake District. So one of the questions I jotted down, and I nearly asked Bonita before we started, was all about the Lake District, but I'm going to stop right there and I'm going to introduce Bonita. Bonita, welcome to the How to Thrive podcast.
Thank you, Claire. Hi, Helen. It's so lovely to be here.
I'm so excited to drill all this down. We met Bonita through kind of like this really tangled way. I think it was via Sarah Furness, wasn't it? Who was our very first podcast guest. So on Sarah's recommendation, we're talking to you, and I know through everyone else that Sarah has recommended that it's going to be a great discussion. So we start every podcast asking our guests to tell us a little bit about kind of your journey and what's brought you to where you are now. So Bonita, what's driven you to be kind of a mountaineer and a speaker? I'm fascinated by the mountaineering piece in particular.
Right, so I was 20 years old. I was at university. I had never climbed a mountain. I wasn't outdoorsy. My parents did not bring us up in that way at all. And it was just one evening, I was lying on the sofa in my student house, watching telly, hungover, and a friend rang me up and invited me to a lecture about mountaineering. And I said to her, why would anyone go to that? And she said, because there'll be loads of hot guys there. And so the rest is history. And from that, I went to this lecture. It was so inspiring. They talked about, getting to the top of Everest, these two mountaineers that were on the stage, and how they could see the curvature of the earth when they got to the top of the world's highest peak. And it was just like this lightning bolt struck me. I was so inspired, and I turned my life upside down and started climbing, reached the top of some of the world's highest mountains. And from that, I started to get invited on to the stage to speak about my experiences and translate those lessons from the ice face into kind of work and life. So that's how we've come across each other.
So you're sitting in a lecture theatre, thinking this is great. Were there any hot men there, by the way? I feel like this is an avenue that we need to just cover off right at the start.
No, but I did marry him in the end. I met my husband many years later on a climbing trip. He's an incredible climber, and we have 2 little climbing children now. So
wow,
yeah, came full circle.
And I don't know whether to mention this now. Do they moan when they walk up hills? Have you got any top tips for that? That might not be for now, but I've got 2 little kids, and they're like, not another walk, mummy.
Yeah, we're still on the walking at the moment, and it's tough. They do enjoy climbing indoors. We have taken them on climbing holidays as well. I think that they're quite happy to do it for a little bit, and then they get bored and they want to do something else. Whereas my husband want to climb all day. So we try not to put them off. Basically, we try not to put too much pressure on them at the moment.
So you're in the lecture hall. You've heard this amazing. You've heard amazing. You're totally inspired. What do you do next? Like, how do you get into climbing? Like, how do you take that next step? And not only that, how do you get into climbing and then go to the top of Everest? I mean, that's not just climbing mountains. That's climbing almost the mountain, right?
Yeah. So the truth was, I didn't walk out that lecture theatre and start climbing the next day. I did actually procrastinate on it for 3 or 4 months. Because I did have those limiting beliefs, like I'm just Bonnie from Wokingham. You have to be superhuman to climb Everest, as my stepdad once told me. Like, there's no way. But because it never went away, this idea it just felt like too much of a good idea for some reason. And so about 3 or 4 months later, I woke up and I was like, I have wasted 3 months thinking about climbing Everest. If I'm not careful, I'm going to wake up in another 3 months, 3 years, 30 years. And, time passes either way. So I can either think about this or I can do something. And right now, the smallest thing I do is going to be infinitely better than months more procrastination. And that moment of like clarity just stopped me from overthinking. And I thought, I've just got to do something. And I literally went on the internet and I think I Googled like, how do you climb Everest? And an article came up saying start small or something like that. And I thought, great, thank goodness. And I joined a beginner's climbing course at an indoor climbing wall. And from the moment that I started, I loved it. I wasn't very good at it. In fact, I was terrible at climbing at first. I made every mistake in the book. I put my helmet on the wrong way round. I didn't know how to put a harness on properly. And being a woman, you are in the beginning at quite a disadvantage with rock climbing. And that's not to be sexist. It's just that most men that are in their early 20s can do at least one pull-up. I couldn't even hang from a bar, like the difference in just that strength there from the off meant that I was just nowhere near as good as my other kind of people in my cohort of that beginner group. But I just tried to have this attitude of, I know I've got this big goal of climbing Everest, but I don't need to be like the best mountaineer today. I don't need to be a know-it-all. I need to be a learn-it-all. I just need to go out every week, climb, ask questions, make silly mistakes, learn from them, and just like go with an open mind and put myself out there and learn as much as I could. And I think it was that mindset in the beginning of trying to be a learn-it-all that in some ways took the pressure off me. This big dream was like weighing over me. Everest, it's impossible. I'm going to fail. I had all those thoughts, but I just would tell myself, well, just go to the climbing wall tonight and just try and like learn a new whatever. Try and get to the top of that climb you can do last time. Learn that new knot. Just silly things. And when I saw that little progress, it kept me going.
I mean, just the thought of Everest, you read so much about Everest and the number of people who have died in attempts to go up and come down. And I think that's a really interesting point. It's not just getting up, it's you've got to come down again as well. Like, how do you get over that I suppose the fear? Is it fear? Do you just blank it out? Are you confident in the training that you've done? How do you get over that?
Well, it was very different when I climbed it. Today we've got social media and it's also gotten really busy and there are just more stories, I think, around it today. Back then, Everest did just feel like more of a mystery. And I'm thankful that there were books like Into Thin Air that were very famous, which is probably the most famous mountaineering book of all time. And it's about a disaster that happened on Everest in 1996. And so I'd obviously read all these books, but, I don't know, I felt like what I was learning about Everest was mainly from people who'd been there, like the leader of my expedition, Kenton, and they were just full of like enthusiasm and like they just described it as like the most beautiful place. So I think I was also, I was admittedly now, I can say this in my late 30s, I was 22 years old when I set foot on Everest. I knew there was like a healthy dose of naivety that got me to that point. And that was a really positive thing ultimately. And I think there's something about, when you're young, you do take risks and that's great. Perhaps when we get older, we can learn from that a little bit more, but we do get so bogged down with like, but what about the consequences? And I think when you're younger, you just have a more positive outlook of like, I'll be okay. And so, yeah, when I stepped onto the mountain, it wasn't all plain sailing. There were really scary moments. But I had done the training on the previous peak. I trusted my team. I trained hard. And, all of those sort of scary moments on the way up were sort of thrilling stories that we told at the end of the day to each other. And it just felt like, it felt fun and amazing rather than this scary kind of thing that we were climbing. We'd chosen to be there. No one was making us climb it. And it was funny because people often asked me at the time to like speak about adversity. And I was thinking, I haven't faced adversity on the mountain. I loved it. And I chose to be there. I put myself in that position. So it's difficult when people sort of ask me about fear and stuff, because I don't really remember feeling that scared, because I was choosing it every single day.
I mean, I think of mountaineering, say, as one of the things I love, and I'm by no way comparing my walking in the Lake District with your level of kind of mountaineering, but one of the things I really love about it is the isolation. I love the fact that me and my husband used to do it a lot before we had kids, and now it's slightly different because I'm dragging the kids up or bribing them up with sweets. But when it was just us, it was just this sense of isolation, you know, the sense of, yes, you might see some people, but you wouldn't see very many, and it's you, and you've got the whole laid out in front of you is like the size of the world and how small you are. Even in the Lake District, I'm always kind of overawed by that. But that makes it feel like quite an individual sport. But actually, when you come to climbing something like Everest, I'm imagining that the individual is a really like infinitesimal amount of the success. You can't do it on your own. It's all part of the team. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think people appreciate that to get one person like me to the top of Everest, you have your summit Sherpa team that will literally go to the summit with you. We're like scuba diving buddies. We are like paired up with a Sherpa so that you're always climbing with someone. And then beyond that, there'll be the next level of Sherpas who don't necessarily go to the summit, but they will, you know, carry up oxygen and help with rope fixing. There is another team of Sherpas that fix the ladders that we have to cross in the Khumbu icefall over the crevasses. And then you have base camp, and you've got your base camp logistics, often a base camp manager. Then you have your cook team and, cook boy. I don't like the term, but that's what they call them. There are so many people and then you've got your porters who bring all the stuff to base camp. They're those, you know, if you've ever seen a picture of someone with like a massive load on their back, which sort of dwarfs them completely, those porters will help us carry our stuff to base camp. And you know, and then you've got your UK team that will probably be doing your comms and all of that stuff. So just one person to get to the top is like a huge operation, and it's so slick and it's incredible. And it's really like where Everest is today, where Himalayan commercial mountaineering is today, is like a testament to great operations, great systems, great teamwork, because people like me are able to climb these peaks. And back in the 1950s, you know, these peaks were an impossibility because, you know, they didn't have all this knowledge of logistics and operations on the mountain that we do today. So it took until 1953 for Everest to even be climbed. It took, you know, that's after 30 years of trying and failing. So today, the fact that someone can wake up and then in 2 years get to the top of Everest is a testament not to their skill, but to the amazing operation that the Sherpas have managed to create on the mountain.
So what would you say is the hardest part? For you, what was the hardest part of it?
It genuinely was such a privilege to be there every day. The hardest part was sometimes in the tent at 3:00 in the morning when you're lying there thinking, I've got to go out and climb through the Khumbu icefall, which is like Russian roulette. You know, ice, you're walking underneath ice pinnacles and ice towers, which like are the size of cars or houses, and they can fall on you without a moment's notice. And a lot of deaths on Everest happen in the Khumbu icefall. And so you're thinking, you know, is this the day my luck runs out? And you're lying there and you're starting to get really overwhelmed in your mind, thinking, should I just stay in the tent? Do I need to climb the mountain? Do I want to die? Why don't I just stay here? It's so warm in my sleeping bag. I don't want to get up and go out there. It's like minus 20 degrees. And so that's the hardest thing, is fighting with the mountain in your own mind. And then actually on the mountain, the toughest part was probably, well, definitely going into the dead zone above 8,000 meters. You're dressed up like an astronaut on planet Earth. You're carrying a tank of oxygen in your backpack. You've got a mask to breathe through over your face. And then you're wearing this big one-piece suit with a massive pair of boots and mittens and goggles, and you just look like a spaceman. And all of this cumbersome equipment, you know, it does a job of keeping you warm and alive, but it's heavy and you're slow and you're just like fighting with every breath up there. And it's hours and hours, 10 hours, 12 hours of climbing to get to the top of the mountain. Sometimes less if you're feeling good. I didn't feel so great on summit day. It took me a while. And then, of course, you've got to get back down. So just in terms of like sheer physical exhaustion, that was definitely the hardest thing ever I've done, I think.
Yeah. And do you spend time, do you have going back to my late district days, do you crack open a flask, have a cup of tea at the top? Like, or is it literally like you get to the top and then you're all so exhausted, you're like, clearly you don't have a cup of tea. I'm just going to put that out, listeners. I'm not that naive. But do you get to the top and actually pause, or is it like, well, we're at the top, turn around, let's go, because we've got quite a long way to go downhill now to get home?
I think people do try and take flasks up, definitely, to have like a hot drink. It's definitely great to have that in an emergency situation. Sometimes just getting some hot fluids into someone can make the difference between life and death. There's like a cup of tea really is a lifesaver, which the British will be pleased to know. And but in terms of how long we spend up there, 10, 15 minutes on the summit, because you've got to get back down. You're doing a job that day. You are getting to the top of the mountain as safely as you can and then getting back down as safely as you can. And so it's just like tick, 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 tick. Everything I've got to do on the summit, done. Right, now we've got to get down. And then when you get back to base camp, that's when you celebrate, because that's when you're safe. So I've had only, I'd say, one moment in my entire life on top of a mountain when I really paused and like really allowed myself to feel the achievement, even though I knew I had a dangerous descent. Because it felt like we were never going to get to the top of this particular mountain. It was so touch and go right up until the last second, and we just didn't give up. And when we got to the top, it was such a surprise. That was just so much joy that I kind of allowed myself to just like wallow in that for a minute. And but that's pretty much the only time I've enjoyed a summit. I don't really enjoy getting to the top of mountains, which sounds crazy.
But that's really interesting, right? Because so much, I think this is a real mantra for life, is that we put so much focus on that one moment of, we very rarely concentrate on the journey. We concentrate on what we're aiming for and where we're striving for, and actually being mindful and being present for the journey is life. Okay, life isn't about the goal, it's about the journey to get there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is one of the key lessons that the mountains have taught me, is that it's so important to have a really big, hairy, audacious goal, because it gets you out of bed and it gets you taking risks and it gets you living life. But in pursuit of that goal, you have amazing experiences you would never have otherwise had if you'd have just stayed at home on the sofa. But ultimately, when you achieve that goal, when you get to the top, it is often just one more moment in weeks of hard work, and it does feel. And everyone says that sounds like such an anticlimax, and the truth is, I guess it is an anticlimax, but that's okay. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like the point of the goal is to get you on the journey, and you want to achieve it, and it's amazing when you achieve it, but because you just had the most incredible, like, life-changing experience to get there, standing on that one little patch of snow for a few minutes, it changes whether you've succeeded or failed to everyone else, and I do that in inverted commas. But internally, I think within, success and failure in the mountains sometimes isn't about getting to the top. It's about how you climb with your team, if you made good decisions. And Everest is a particularly kind of confusing one for me, because we got to the summit and it was great. It was this huge success, and I broke a record for becoming the youngest British woman to climb the mountain and stuff like that. But then on the way down, I made a really silly mistake. I picked up the wrong rope, and it was like an old piece of rope that sort of came free on the mountain. And when I pulled my weight onto it, it didn't come tight and I fell. And that sort of split-second decision really badly injured me, and meant that my team had to then help me down the mountain, which put them at risk. And so I came away from Everest, even though everyone was fine, and I was fine in the end, and we did get to base camp, feeling like I've just had the biggest success of my life. and getting to the top was great, but there was also this kind of failure on the way down. And so when I got home, everyone was like celebrating me and saying, you got to the summit. And I was like, is the summit the success? Because I don't feel like I was successful. I feel like we kind of were lucky basically to get off that mountain. And that doesn't feel like success to me. I felt like, just because it's success to the press, I was in all the newspapers, success to my family and friends, I didn't feel successful when I got back from Everest. I felt like I should have not made that little mistake. So yeah, it's funny that you just can't tie success into whether you get to the top or not. It's about so much more.
But also, I mean, like when you think, it's really relatable on different scales, but we're so bad, aren't we, at forgetting the context, I suppose, of everything you've achieved and focusing in on one moment and what happened in that one moment. Because, climbing Everest was so much more than that one moment. It's the years leading up to it and all the rest of it. And yet that's the bit that we beat ourselves up about. The one small thing, relatively small, but yeah. So you come down Everest, done, tick. What do you do next? At what point where do you go from Everest?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, everyone was, I was on the front cover of newspapers when I got back home. Like, that doesn't happen to most mountaineers when they climb a mountain. Like, you're not a headline in the Sun or the Daily Mail. But I was, because I'd broken this record, and it must have been a slow news week. And so there was this huge media frenzy about me getting back, and all of this adulation from people. And I just felt like, I didn't really feel particularly successful at all. I as I said, I felt like I should have climbed that mountain better, and I knew I could. So even though it felt like success to everyone else, to me, I felt like it was unfinished business. That's what I felt. And I very quickly knew that I had made a silly mistake on the mountain, which I knew that I couldn't ever make again, and I could learn from that. And there were other things that had led up to that moment as well, like, the kind of team dynamic on the day wasn't great, and that meant that probably that also so there were lots of factors that led up to this one moment, and I had time to reflect and go, God, all of that stuff, I could climb another mountain and I could make sure that doesn't happen next time. And wouldn't it be great to kind of put to rest all of those mistakes and try and do better? And so that became my life focus from that point, was just to learn as much as I could from Everest and become a better climber. And it took 2 years before I went back to Everest. And I climbed other mountains in the Himalayas. I climbed all over Europe and the UK, and really focused all of my energy on getting down mountains in the perfect style and doing it as safe as possible. And then finally I went back to Everest in 2012, and not to climb Everest again. I wasn't that stupid, but to climb the mountain next door, which was called Lhotse. And Lhotse is the world's 4th highest peak. It's at the time anyway, it was rarely climbed. There just wasn't that many people on the mountain. It didn't really get any attention, and mainly because Everest was the far more glamorous big sister. But this peak was the 4th highest in the world, and it shared a lot of the route with Everest. And so I just felt like I was returning to the scene of the crime. I could be there back on the mountain and hopefully just do a much better job and get some closure, as that word, but it was kind of felt like that's what it was. And so I climbed Lhotse with a very small team, one guy from the US and 2 Sherpas, and the 4 of us climbed this mountain. It was a really up and down expedition. We really didn't think we were going to get to the top for so many different reasons. So many things happened, but we did, and it was we got to the top. It was the most amazing moment. That was the moment when I really allowed myself to sit on the summit and take it in. We climbed down the peak, and this was my moment to, obviously I looked down from the summit and I looked at the descent, and I just told myself, this is your chance. Don't make a mistake. And we got down in great style, and it just felt really cathartic to define success for myself, because nobody at home knew what Lhotse was. The press didn't care about what Lhotse was. everyone's like, you've done Everest, you're successful, like hang up your climbing boots, move on with your life, you've peaked. But I was like, no, there's so much more to give. And I didn't care that nobody else had heard of this other mountain in my world anyway. I wanted to define success for myself. And I think that's so important in life. It doesn't matter what other people think success is, it's what you think it is. And I'm so grateful that I was willing to pursue that. And I learned so much about myself on that journey, mainly that things will go wrong. You will have crushing defeats and amazing success in your life, but learning from it, not giving up, not refusing to kind of, settle, that's important. And just going after what you think you're capable of. That was the greatest lesson for me to learn there.
Are you encouraged to do sort of debriefs after something like Everest? It sounds like you carried this with you, this experience, for a long time. Still obviously hugely impactful. But do they kind of teach you to do sort of debriefs after a climb, or kind of to look back at it in a kind of a systemic way or systematic way to really understand and help kind of sort some of those feelings that you're experiencing?
Not from my experience, but my experience would have been a very small corner of the whole climbing community. So it might be a standard thing to do if you're from a different country, but certainly not anything I've ever come across in the mountains. And I think that is just, when I look back now, I think when you're 22, you don't know what's good practice and what's not. You look at your leaders, you look at the people that are older than you and know better than you, and you think that they're amazing and, they do everything right. But now I'm older, I can see that there was so much more that, if I was leading me on that mountain, or if I had my younger self on the mountain, I would have done things very differently. And so, yeah, absolutely. Like there were no debriefs, and I think that there should have been. And in fact, that's like something I think we should, that should be rolled out across all of the mountaineering industry. And it's shame really that it's not something that is there, because obviously a lot of mountaineering traditionally is come from the military and things like that. So why not when it's such a prevalent thing there?
So you come back, so you do Lhotse, was it? I love that. I love those, the unknown one. And what do you do from there? Are you into the corporate world? Are you still climbing mountains? What's your next? What if it does feel a bit like and I kind of get this, is that if your definition of success, and I remember Johnny Wilkinson talking about this, about kicking the drop goal in the World Cup, and how he after that he suffered quite extreme depression, I think, because that was he'd done it. That was everything he'd trained to do, and then he'd done it and he'd achieved it, and he was like, well, now what do I do? So I guess at that point it is about redefining your success. So you've put the demons to bed. What do you do now? What's the shift? What's the focus? What are you aiming for? What's the goal?
I think that's so interesting with professional athletes, because Johnny, for him, the ultimate was playing on that stage, in that stadium, with those massive crowds. Whereas when you're in the mountains, your stadium is the mountains, and you don't have to be at the top of your game to be in the mountains. There's people that still climb in their 60s and 70s, and maybe their prime was back 20 years ago, but that doesn't mean that they have to stop. But with someone like Johnny Wilkinson, it's not like he's just going to go back to local Saturday rugby or something like that. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like that thing that he loved was over when he reached the pinnacle of what he did. And so I think it's just different in the climbing world. People always say, oh, did you not get that massive crash after you'd achieved your goals? And it was like, well, no, because there was always another mountain that I could go and climb. And I just think it's very different for athletes. You can't endlessly keep going to the Olympics, but you can endlessly go to the mountains. So the actual process of climbing is what I love the most. Having the goal to get to the top of the mountain is what then gets, that process away, so I can get to the mountain. I can actually live out my dream of climbing this peak. After I climbed Lhotse, though, I did go into the speaking world and started to learn how to translate those lessons that I'd learned from like massive failure and about resilience and about teams and about goal setting and apply those to business. And that's been a whole different challenge in itself. So it's been really good fun, but scary in a very different way.
How terrifying was it, given what you've done? I suppose it's very different, right? So you do you've done the physical, the mountaineering, all that kind of thing, but standing in front of a stage is probably not something that you had, it was a way of using, I suppose, all your experience. But was it as terrifying as, as crossing the ice? Is it, where does it fit in? Because I imagine it's terrifying.
It's still terrifying. Actually, I watched Damien Hughes from the High Performance podcast. We were talking about him just before we press record. He was speaking about the fact that the top two biggest fears of people in the UK, there's a big survey done, and the number one fear was of public speaking or being, standing up in public. And the second biggest fear of people in the UK was heights. So I was like, brilliant. I do public speaking and I do climbing. So I've got like the two biggest fears. And then the third fear was dying. So
oh God,
people are more scared of like public speaking and heights than they are of death. So I thought, okay, that's good to know. Now that makes sense as to why my body is in like constant state of like anxiety, because I'm headlining conferences all over the world. And I've always got that imposter syndrome in the back of my mind. But when I get on the stage, I absolutely love it. I love it. It's just like you feel the audience connecting with your story. I'm sharing, my lowest moments, and I'm seeing that people are kind of on the journey with me. People are crying, people are laughing, and then you get to the high moments and people are getting really excited. And it's just to be able to share what I have learned and see it affect others is just like the best privilege. But of course, before you go on stage, you're always going to be fearful of like the tech or the timing or whatever it is. And I think that's actually a really good thing. I think it's good to be scared. It's good to be scared in the mountains. Like if you're not, that's when things go wrong. The best talks I give are often when I'm really nervous. It's when I'm complacent and I feel chilled out and comfortable. That's when I'll give a rubbish speech. So yeah, the fear is there, but it's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, it's that, we talk about that quadrant, don't we, Helen, between motivation, accountability and that learning zone where you want to be in the learning zone rather than the comfort zone. But yeah, it's imagining.
It's just, I think climbing and speaking is so similar in the sense that you've just got to take the leap of faith. Like you'll get to a point when you overthink it and you've just got to do it. And I've been around climbing and speaking for long enough to have made every mistake that you can. I've fainted on stage. I've walked onto stage with I had a dress with a zip, like a sideways zip. And when I had mic'd up, I'd forgotten to do the zip up. So like my bra was hanging out and I walked on stage. So obviously noticed and did it up, thankfully. But, I have said things that I shouldn't have said that I thought were funny that fell flat. I have made every mistake and I am still here. I survived. So like, I think when you have that much experience, you just sort of feel like whatever happens, if it goes wrong, I'll deal with it. I'll learn a lesson. It will be a story I tell on a podcast one day, that kind of thing. So you just try and keep it in perspective as well. It's like, it's not life and death on stage like it is in the mountains.
Well, I think it's really amazing as well. We don't put the video out other than in promotional, but for anyone who's listening to this, when you see Bonita's like background, you can see loads of different post-it notes. I can't see what's on them, but loads of different post-it notes. And that's you structuring your talk, isn't it? Which is amazing. Like the craft that goes into it. I'm really intrigued about it. Do you learn how to do that? Do you go on a course? Is there you've done something really amazing, this is how you turn it into motivational speaking? Like how do you learn how to do that?
No one's ever taught me how to speak. I very recently I went, I was invited on like a speaker training day, but that was more about like the business side of speaking, how to position yourself, how to market yourself. I've never learned how to deliver a speech. I learned by making mistakes. I learned by getting up there and falling flat and running over time and, doing all those things that you shouldn't do. But because I have been doing it for so long, like 15 years I've been speaking for now, you get to a point where you just know it. And so that's a new speech that I think the last time we spoke was still on the wall. I've just kind of left it up there because I'm still not happy with it. I'm still out there delivering with it and then coming home and moving things around and stuff. But I'm a very visual learner. So I need to get things like on the wall and look at them and move them. I can't just like do it in my mind or a spreadsheet or something like that. It's got to be like colorful and in 3D. If it was just like I was doing it on a spreadsheet and like moving the little bits around, it wouldn't be the same.
So, I mean, a great conversation. I'm really excited because I'm going to a conference in May, and quite by chance, actually, when I picked up the agenda, I was like, Bonita's the keynote. So I get to see you do your thing live on stage, which no pressure, I'm really excited about. So that would be awesome. So we always ask our guests for their top 3 tips for thriving, and I suppose the question that maybe before that is I would ask you is like, it's really interesting the conversations we've been having around success and about the journey. So what do you, if you had to sum up what you think thriving means for you in your life, in your world, what would you sum it up as?
Gosh, it's such a good question. I think the most meaningful experiences of my life has often been seeing other people succeeding because I have mentored them or supported them in some way. And definitely, like after I climbed Everest, I'd broken this record for being the youngest British woman to reach the summit. And then very shortly after, a young woman contacted me and was like, I want to break that record that you've got. And all my friends said to me, well, don't help her, keep the record. But because I had fantastic mentors in the mountains, especially from a woman called Tori James, who had also like once held that record, and she had supported me, I felt like it was now my turn to pass on what she gave me to the next generation. And so I supported this young woman, and she did indeed reach the top of Everest. And meeting her back at Everest Base Camp, where she came down from the summit, and like hugging her and telling her how proud I was of her, it was like the best moment I'd ever had in my life up till that point. And I reflected on that and realized that it felt much better to give the record away to her and have that moment with her than it was to get to the top of Everest myself and take the record. Or like no summit had ever come close to that moment of joy that I'd felt with her and seeing her succeed. So that really made me, again, question success, because you're always told to like take things for yourself and like get success, but it was giving it away that felt the most successful thing. So I think thriving is being part of something bigger than yourself and, being part of the village. And it takes a lot of effort to be part of the village. It's a sacrifice. It's, it's helping people out when maybe you don't always have the time, and it's supporting people that, Becky sometimes was quite frustrating. I would say to her, like, you've got to, because we need to raise a lot of money to climb these mountains. And I was trying to make her find a sponsor, and she was like, it's never going to work. And I was like, yes, get on the phone and call someone. And she got there in the end. And I was just, I was so proud of her, but also I was like really proud for myself for like putting that into that time and energy into her. And the outcome was just like the best thing in the world. So that's what thriving is to me, is being part of that community.
Amazing. And then I suppose the question we ask all of our guests, if you were to sum up like thriving and give us 3 tips, what would yours be?
There's a million tips. If I had to reduce them down, though, number 1, I would say having goals is really important. Have your summit. It doesn't have to be Everest. It could be, Snowdon. And I'm talking metaphorically here, right? But the importance of like having a big, what do you call them? Smart goals. Like it's got to be measurable. It's got to be actionable. It's got to be time limited, etc. Like have a goal and work towards it. The confidence that it builds when you achieve even a small goal, whether that's like learning how to make the best omelette in the world or running a 5K, there's a huge confidence boost in that. And I think that allows you to then like go on to bigger and bigger goals. And it just makes you feel like you've got something more in your life than just work and kids and like, So that's thriving for me. And then the other two things are just, I'm really lucky I've got like great relationships. And I think it's so important to invest in those relationships and give as much as, you can. And I have a thing with my husband where I feel like we try and outcompete each other in terms of like doing things for one another. And he always wins. He's so much better at being a husband than I am a wife. But it's just that thing of like just doing things for each other without being asked, and like just being always trying to outcompete each other to be the best you can in that relationship. And I love that. And the final thing, I would just say that nature is really important. And obviously I'm going to say that coming from my background, but for me, I have processed so much of the stuff that's happened to me in my life through being in the outdoors, the solitary kind of world that you described, that you were so affected by in the Lake District. We need it. Our brains evolved into a world that was the natural world. And so a lot of the natural world around us just like makes sense. Emails, traffic, jobs, offices don't really make sense to our ancient brain, but being outdoors in nature does. So if you want to thrive, you have to have a connection to the outdoor world, I think, as well, even in a small way.
So what's next? Have you got another mountain in you? Are you constantly mountaineering? Have you got any big plans? Are you what's your goal? What's your working towards?
Yeah, so I've got mountain goals. The mountains are smaller these days because my kids are quite small, but as they get bigger, I hope the mountains get bigger. But yes, definitely I want to go back and climb another 8,000 meter peak in the Himalayas in the next year or so, and hopefully do some climbing in the Alps this summer as well on like smaller peaks. But and I've got goals outside of mountaineering as well, which I probably shouldn't talk about because they may or may not happen. But mountaineering will always be the hobby and the passion, but there's still so much more to life as well. And so stay tuned.
So Bonnie, we're coming off the back of recording an episode with Bonnie that we did earlier this week, and as we always do, it's like time to pause and think. And actually, I think this one's kind of challenged us in many respects, hasn't it? We were talking about this before about challenging about kind of the lessons and drawing it together. I think the thing that stuck out most for me, if I'm honest, was, and this goes back because when I first spoke to Bonnie, and then we did we caught up before we hit record. She was really keen to say to me, I know I climbed Everest. I know I got to the top, but actually it's about a lot more than that, and it's about a lot's happened since Everest. And I was really intrigued by that because I think she's probably held out as this mountaineer who's done this amazing, amazing thing, and yet that is very much one aspect of what she's achieved, and kind of going beyond this big goal and being defined by it. I mean, I highlighted as well, and I spoke about the fact that we know that Johnny Wilkinson talks about winning the World Cup and about feeling quite lost after it because that was his one big thing, and then moving forward. So for me, that was the bit that really stood out. This feeling that it's not just about this one thing, it's about so much more, and enjoying the entire journey, not just aiming for one big thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was really interesting when we were talking to her about actually her memory or her lasting impression of going up Everest was that she made a mistake on the way back down, and then we talked a little bit about the fact that they didn't do a debrief, and I just sort of think, how applicable is that to real life, in that we often in our work do amazing things but make a small mistake on the way down and carry it for a very long time. And I just think that's kind of really, really interesting to me, and interesting that even in something as sort of important as mountaineering, actually basic principles like employing debriefs are sometimes missed. And I kind of was really shocked by that, because I thought actually that would have helped you perhaps reflect on your experience and put that piece aside so that you could actually truly understand what you'd achieved and enjoy what you'd achieved, rather than kind of coming away with some sort of, it almost felt like a bit like shame, like I made this silly mistake. And I thought, that's the real shame.
Well, yeah. But is that also the way that our brains are wired, right? It's that kind of, it's protecting ourselves in many respects. But, again, like when I said to her, how long do you get to have at the top? And it's minutes, really, in the grand scheme of things. So, yeah, I mean, I also was thinking that is that partly because with the lack of a debrief, is that because, we talk within our training about the difference between teaming and teams. Right. And teaming being like agile, new people, how you kind of build that level of trust and that level of trust, I suppose, to really perform at your highest level. And actually, from what Bonnie was saying, my understanding is that you have this amazing group of Sherpas who go up with you, and they're with you on that journey up and on that journey down, but they're there for a very isolated part. So it does feel very much like teaming, and you'll be able to talk much more eloquently to this, Helen, than I can, but it feels very much like you've got that really dynamic team, people coming in, people coming out. And so how do you build that high performing team quickly and powerfully?
Yeah. So, when we look at like Amy Edmondson's work on teaming, not having the luxury of a stable membership of your team is exactly the situation she was kind of describing, and how we use curiosity, passion, empathy to actually make it possible to bond really quickly with people and then form high-performing teams. But I was just quite interested in actually what the process was of creating that space for curiosity, for passion, for empathy, for understanding each other, and whether there were any kind of communication barriers, perhaps language barriers, how easy that was to achieve, and whether there are any kind of lessons there as well. Because I would imagine that's fundamental to the success. And also then developing psychological safety so that you can actually speak up if you're feeling that actually something's not right, rather than kind of I wonder how much the safety play on it is that you're maybe told that you must speak up for safety. If you are concerned something's not right, then you must speak up.
And it's interesting because you were talking about psychological safety, and I think it's in Matthew Syed's book, actually, when he talks about black box thinking. I think it's black box thinking, where he talks about one of the examples he gives is a mountaineering team and a mountaineering disaster that happened. Because there wasn't seen to be that level of psychological safety, and people didn't speak up and people didn't challenge. And I think we were talking about this as well, about, the hierarchy and the place that hierarchy plays. And it must be really complicated and quite tricky on a mountain, because it feels like in that event you need the hierarchy, and I suppose the Sherpas are naturally going to know the terrain better, and they're going to know the conditions because they're more accustomed to it. So I imagine that there is a greater level of hierarchy than in normal being sea level situations. But yet, how do you balance that with the need for everybody to feel confident to speak up and able to speak up and understood because of the language barriers? It's a very complicated structure, I suspect.
And I kind of thinking of the leadership and who is perceived to be the leader and how do they lead and what style do they employ and what's necessary in that kind of environment over, I'm imagining that there's some moments where you'd have to be very, very direct. So, yeah, I find it fascinating.
I'd love to be like a fly on the wall. I'm not sure I ever want to go up Everest, or that I am ever physically fit or inclined enough to do it. However, I would love to be a fly on the wall and see actually how it works in terms of the hierarchy and the just in terms of it works in the teamwork. Because there's also this added dynamic, obviously, that the Sherpas are essentially, and again, never done it, but imagine the Sherpas are employed. Right? They are employed by you. So they are leading you, they are, but the natural hierarchy of things is challenging from the start. really interesting. And actually, maybe this is a follow-up session with Bonnie to ask her all of these questions which have surfaced since we originally recorded. But poor thing, I'm hearing her speak in a few weeks, and after dinner thing, I'm going to have this long list of questions.
Take a roving mic.
Another thing,
I think slight interesting parallel, and I don't know whether it is a parallel or not, but I know you went through a stage of doing quite a lot of skydiving, and I've only ever done it once and wouldn't be rushing to repeat it. It was not my favourite experience of my life. I really don't see the point in jumping out of a perfectly serviceable plane.
I mean, I also feel like we need to caveat you did quite a lot. I didn't do quite a lot. I did about
you did it more than once, which was more than me, let's face it.
Yeah.
And I just was reflecting on that with the benefit of hindsight of kind of actually what was it that I really disliked about it? And it was because we were doing it on it's a charity day. They were trying to get as many jumps through as possible. There wasn't that time to meet the person you were ultimately going to be strapped to. There was no psychological safety. There was little trust, but it was assumed trust. It was, I have to trust this person because I'm about to throw myself out of a plane with them. I didn't feel that there was any understanding of empathy. There was no understanding of passion. It's really interesting. We didn't form a team on that moment. And I think that meant that actually I was just really grateful not to have to see them ever again.
But then, is it about forming a team in those moments, or is it about delegating? Is it like you saying you've come to do a skydive, you're only going to ever do it once, you're doing it for charity? Are you basically being required to delegate all of your autonomy to somebody else?
Maybe. Just assume helplessness and just do what you're told.
Yeah.
And again, yes, but I would think that the difference being that for a skydive, it's like I don't know how long the whole process took. It didn't take a long time, maybe half an hour, an hour, but for climbing Everest, it would be a lot longer. And I'm imagining the cognitive bandwidth that could be clogged up by not having the things you need to feel safe, sort of almost basic human needs, could then really influence how you're able to show up in that moment.
Yeah. And I was just thinking that, I mean, it's a long, long time ago that I ever did anything like that, but I did it like as in I trained to do it. I never got to the free fall stage, but I've never done it with someone else. So I did it, you do a static line jump, like a whole world of them, but you go through a huge amount of training first. So whilst I'm not sure what I ever would have done if the static line didn't work and my parachute didn't open, you've done a lot of training, so you feel a lot more like empowered, I suppose. You're not delegating your entire being to someone else.
But anyway, that's a kind of a complete.
That's fact. Yeah. No, but it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting thought. So I think more than a lot of other podcasts, I think Bonnie's really we've gone away and really kind of thought about it and thought about the lessons and thought about how it applies to us and our lives. And definitely been providing me with kind of the food for thought. And then her three top tips for thriving are what we would deem like the absolute classics. Have goals and work towards it. Absolutely. Invest in relationships. Well, that's exactly what we've been talking about now, right? Investing in relationships. And interesting what she was saying about investing in relationships beyond as well, and about passing over her title of being the youngest person to climb Everest, or the youngest woman to climb Everest, I'm not sure which. And then nature being really important. I think Helen and I talk a lot about this. Me in particular, I am at my most productive, I think, certainly my brain is at its most productive when I'm out walking the dog or just surrounded by greenery and the world around us. So I will be taking that away with me, going to the Lake District in May half term. Not entirely sure I'll be doing mountaineering, but pottering.
Pottering up
I'll
hills.
think of it as I'm pottering.
It's your way. You're mountaineering your way, the way you enjoy it.
Yeah. Mountaineering my way. Exactly. Anyway, another great podcast, really interesting. And let us know what you think. Let us know what you think. And also, if you've got anybody who you think, they would make a great podcast. I know a lot of our listeners go to a lot of events, hear a lot of people, and we're always really interested to have recommendations for who we should talk to. But yes. Now, Helen, off you go. Take the jumper off and go and sit in the sun. I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.